In the small town of Glover Creek, Texas, everyone knew the boy who helped the pastor on Sundays and fixed bicycles on the front porch. His name was Julian Ryan. 17 years old, easy smile, and calloused hands from lifting lumber with his father in the makeshift workshop behind the house. His mother, Maggie, used to say his heart flowed like a river current, strong but gentle. Maybe that's why he was so good at reading people. He knew when his little sister was sad even if she smiled, or when his father hid bills behind a chipped coffee mug. That afternoon, the sky was still blue. The wind rustled through the cornfields like an old whisper. But Julian wasn't at ease. He stood still on the front steps, eyes squinting toward the horizon, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. "Heavy rain's coming," he muttered. No one paid much attention. It was Texas. Rain was part of the rhythm. He spent the rest of the day boarding up windows, raising the truck tires on makeshift concrete blocks, and stacking emergency food in the pantry. His dad teased him for acting like an old man. His mother just shook her head and smiled as his 9-year-old sister, Lily, played with fabric scraps in the backyard, completely unaware of the storm building in the air. But Julian felt it. He couldn't explain why, but there was something in the wind, a hush, as if the world was holding its breath. When night fell, he stayed awake, listening to the tapping of rain on the tin roof, the creak of old wood settling, the kind of quiet that makes your chest tighten. The old radio in the kitchen crackled out warnings from the next county over, flash floods, possible landslides. Julian raised his eyes to the darkness beyond the window. He wasn't the kind of person to run from danger, but something about that night made him wish, for once, that he was wrong. His father found him sitting on the porch at 2 a.m, staring into the rising storm. "You should get some sleep, son," he said. Julian didn't move. "Dad, have you ever felt like something bad was about to happen, even when there's no proof?" His dad sighed. "That's called worry. It passes if you stop thinking too much." But Julian didn't stop. By morning, water had already swallowed the streets. The first thing Maggie Ryan saw that morning when she opened the kitchen window was the reflection of the sky in the street. Brown floodwater was already licking the tires of the neighbor's pickup truck. The chickens, once scattered around the yard, had taken refuge on top of their coop, clucking nervously like they knew the world was slipping. Julian was already outside, soaked up to his knees. Since 5 a.m, he'd been dragging sandbags and stacking them against the doors. A headlamp held to his forehead with duct tape cast shaky light across his flannel shirt. He looked less like a boy now and more like someone the storm had summoned. "It's coming up fast. Radio says the north levee broke. We don't have much time," he said, breathless, still moving. His father tried calling neighbors, but the lines were already dead. The silence between distant sirens was heavier than any scream. Even the birds had stopped. Julian scooped Lily into his arms and set her down on the kitchen counter. "You're gonna be okay, I promise," he whispered. Her tiny fingers clutched his hand, trembling. "You too, right?" she asked. Julian paused, then smiled. "Of course." They tried to leave, but the street was a river now, moving with a current strong enough to drag anything that touched it. His father considered using the truck, but the engine coughed and died. Maggie clutched Lily tighter as the wind howled through cracks in the house, rattling the walls like warning knocks from the storm itself. Julian didn't stop. He climbed shelves, tied down furniture, nailed loose boards. Every action bought them seconds, maybe minutes. Time was all he was trying to buy. Time for someone to come. Time for hope to arrive. Time for the water to show mercy. But mercy never came. With a thunderous crash, the back window shattered. Water surged in, swallowing the kitchen floor like a beast. Lily screamed. Maggie collapsed to her knees, trying to shield her. Julian grabbed them both, pushing them toward the stairs. "Upstairs now!" he shouted, voice cutting through the chaos. They reached the attic. Julian slammed the hatch shut behind them, securing it with a rusted pipe. Downstairs, water churned like it was alive. In the shadows, the house groaned, a wounded animal trying to hold itself together. Julian looked at his family huddled together, breathless, terrified, soaked. He didn't show it, but inside he already knew. This storm wasn't going to stop. Not soon enough. Not for them. And that meant he would have to do more than survive. He would have to become the storm's equal. The attic was dark, hot, and smelled of wet wood and dust. Maggie pressed Lily close, wrapping them both in a quilt that barely held back the cold seeping in. Julian had locked the attic hatch with an old metal pipe, but water still found its way through the seams of the house, swelling the boards beneath their feet. Outside, the wind was screaming now. Not howling, not whistling, but screaming. It pounded the rooftop like fists trying to break through. Thunder rolled so low it seemed to come from the ground beneath them. Julian paced the narrow space, searching through old boxes, crates, anything that might be useful. He found an old jump rope, 2 faded floaties from Lily's toddler years, and a styrofoam cooler. It wasn't a rescue kit, but it was all they had. "We'll need to get to the roof," he said, half to himself. His father sat silently by the attic window, staring out at what used to be their neighborhood. There was no more street, no more fences or mailbox, just water stretching to the treetops, stained with mud and ruin. Julian knelt beside him. "Dad, we have to get higher. If a chopper comes—" "There won't be time," his father murmured. "They can't reach everyone." Julian knew he was right. But if they waited, they were already lost. He turned back to Lily. She was so small, so quiet now, eyes wide and wet. She was watching him like he was the only light in a world that had gone completely dark, and that weight was heavier than the flood pressing against the house. "I'm gonna get us out," he whispered to her. "You just have to be brave a little longer." He grabbed the jump rope and tied one end around the cooler, threading it through one of the attic support beams. Then he moved to the window, trying to force it open. It wouldn't budge. Years of paint and time had sealed it shut. His mother came up behind him. "Julian, we're proud of you, no matter what." That stopped him. Just for a second. But seconds mattered. He braced his shoulder and threw himself against the window. Once, twice. On the third try, the glass cracked. He kept going until shards rained onto the roof. Wind poured in. Rain whipped against his face like slaps. He turned around. "We go one at a time. I'll go last." No one argued. But as he watched them get ready, as he adjusted Lily's floaties and tied the rope around her waist, a decision formed in his mind, quiet and certain. They didn't know yet, but Julian did. He wouldn't be going with them. Julian helped his mother through the broken window first. She was shaking from cold, from fear, from something deeper. The rooftop sloped steeply, slick with rain and coated in debris. Maggie lowered herself down with care, gripping the rope like it was her last tether to earth. Julian steadied her from inside until she made it to the other side, huddled flat against the wet shingles. Next came Lily. Julian wrapped her in the old quilt, then pulled it tight beneath her arms and tied the cooler securely around her chest. "You're going on a little adventure now," he told her with a shaky smile, brushing wet strands of hair from her forehead. "Just pretend it's one of your stories." "Will you hold my hand out there?" she asked, eyes full of fear. "I'll be right behind you," he lied. He lifted her gently through the window, guiding her feet until she was in their mother's arms. Maggie held her close like a bird sheltering its last chick from the rain. Julian's father didn't move. He still stood near the shadows, hands curled into fists at his sides. He'd barely spoken since the attic. Julian turned to him. "It's time." The man looked at him for a long moment, as if only just realizing the boy standing in front of him wasn't just a son anymore. He was something more. Bigger than fear. Bigger than him. "Go," Julian said. "They need you." "I'm not leaving you behind," his father growled through clenched teeth. "You're not," Julian replied, placing a hand on his father's chest. "You're saving them. That's what matters." And then, in one motion, Julian pushed him. Not hard, just enough to get him through the window before he could argue, before the guilt could take root, before either of them could change their mind. The moment his father's feet hit the roof, Julian pulled the rope in and slammed the window shut, locked it from inside. He backed away from the glass, breath heavy, eyes wide with everything he wouldn't get to say. On the roof, his mother screamed. His father pounded on the window. Lily cried his name until the storm swallowed it. But Julian stayed still and calm, because there was one last thing to do. He turned back toward the attic hatch. Water was rising fast through the boards, licking at the corners of old cardboard boxes, soaking into wood that once held memories. There was someone else, someone still inside, a neighbor, an old man 2 houses down who never left, and Julian had promised to check on him. Julian stood barefoot at the edge of the attic, where water had now claimed half the space. The step was slower, heavier, the soaked floorboards groaning beneath his weight like they were begging him not to go. But he kept moving. His flashlight flickered in the gloom, casting ghostly shadows across the walls where childhood drawings still clung, crayon stick figures, paper stars. He reached the hatch, forced it open. The flood surged up like a living thing, cold and strong, slapping against his knees the moment he dropped down into the stairwell. Debris floated around him, chairs, kitchen pans, a framed family photo with the glass cracked. Julian shoved it aside and pushed forward. The front door was underwater, the windows shattered. The house groaned in protest as it leaned slightly to the side, its foundation no longer grounded. But Julian didn't hesitate. He grabbed the rope from the banister, wrapped it around his waist, and kicked open a back window. The current pulled him instantly. It was like diving into the lungs of the storm. Deafening, wild, unforgiving. The water didn't carry you, it flung you. Julian fought to breathe, to orient himself. The flashlight was gone. Darkness wrapped around him like claws, but his mind had mapped the streets. He swam blind, trusting memory, trusting instinct, trusting love. Mr. Hobbs lived 2 houses away, alone. He was the kind of man who said little, but always left canned peaches on their porch at Christmas. Julian couldn't forget that. He turned a corner and collided with a branch. Blood mixed with water from a gash above his eye, but he kept going. His lungs burned, his legs cramped. And then, finally, the Hobbs house. It was barely holding on, the porch collapsed, door hanging by a hinge. Julian pulled himself through a window and inside, coughing, shivering. "Mr. Hobbs," he shouted. "It's Julian. I'm here." No answer. He kicked aside furniture, searching, slipping. And then, a cough, a groan. He found the old man wedged between 2 bookshelves, water up to his chest, eyes glazed but alive. Julian rushed to him, breathless. "I've got you." The old man looked at him, confused, then whispered, Why would you come back?" Julian didn't answer. Some things are bigger than words. Julian struggled to lift Mr. Hobbs. The man's legs were pinned beneath a collapsed shelf, and each time Julian tried to pull him free, the current inside the house pushed back. The water was chest deep now, rising fast. Time wasn't running out. It had already run out. But Julian didn't stop. "Just a little more," he whispered through clenched teeth. He braced his shoulder under the bookshelf and pushed with everything he had. Something popped in his back, sharp and hot, but the shelf gave way. Hobbs cried out as Julian pulled him upward, holding the man against his chest like a child, guiding them both toward the shattered window. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. If anything, it came down harder now, like the sky was trying to drown memory itself. Julian maneuvered through the opening with the old man's arm slung around his neck. The rope tied around Julian's waist snagged briefly on a nail, then came loose. They slipped into the water. Julian kicked furiously, one arm around Hobbs, the other trying to stay above water. The cold bit into him deeper now, not just his skin, but into his bones, his breath, his thoughts. He felt himself slowing, sinking, but every time he thought he couldn't go on, he saw Lily's face, heard her voice. "You too, right?" "Yes, Lily, me too." He gritted his teeth and swam. He didn't know where they were anymore. The neighborhood was gone, landmarks erased. The world had become a liquid memory. But then, a voice. Faint, distant, a searchlight, a horn, a boat. Julian screamed, waving one arm as he kept Hobbs' head above water. The spotlight turned, scanning, searching. Then There! Over there! Strong arms reached into the water. Julian felt fingers grab his shoulder, then his arm. Hobbs was lifted first, coughing, spitting water. Then came Julian. They dragged him onto the deck. He lay there, gasping, trembling. Everything ached. He couldn't see clearly, couldn't speak. But he heard voices, urgent, grateful, amazed. And then, just before he passed out, he heard it. They found his family safe, up on the roof. The shelter smelled of wet blankets, bleach, and hope barely clinging to the edges. Families sat huddled around battery-powered lanterns. Volunteers moved like shadows, offering food, dry clothes, warm hands. But the Ryans, Maggie, Lily, and Julian's father, sat in a silence too heavy for words. They had been rescued hours earlier, pulled from the rooftop by a team in an inflatable raft. Lily kept asking for her brother. Maggie, her face pale and trembling, had said nothing since they touched dry ground. And the father, a man who once stood tall, now folded inward like a broken barn beam. When the rescuers brought in Mr. Hobbs, soaking wet and barely breathing, Maggie stood. Her voice cracked like old wood. "Where's Julian?" The medic looked down, then away. "He saved him," the man said quietly. "But he went under." No one spoke. No one moved. Lily's cry came first, not loud but small, like a candle flickering. "No," he promised. The father punched the wall. Maggie collapsed into her chair, but somewhere, someone whispered his name. A nurse who heard the story, a boy in the corner who saw him carried in, and then another voice, and another. Soon, in the shelter, people were speaking of a teenager who'd swum into the heart of a flood, carrying an old man on his back. They didn't know his face, but they knew his name. Julian. The boy who didn't wait for rescue. The boy who became it. And while his family sat in unbearable silence, strangers lit candles for a boy they'd never met. But he wasn't gone. Not yet. Because deep in the ER of the county hospital, beneath the haze of machines and wires, a heart still beat. Faint. But there. And the doctors, they weren't giving up. Not on a name like that. Julian's eyes opened 3 days after the storm. The machines had kept his lungs breathing. The nurses had spoken his name as if it anchored him to this world. But what pulled him back, what truly called him, was Lily's voice, soft and broken, whispering, "You said you'd be right behind me." And so he was. The hospital room was quiet when he blinked, slow and uncertain. The world came back in fragments. Light through blinds, the beeping of a heart monitor, the ache in every part of him. But then, a hand wrapped around his, small, familiar. Lily. "You're late," she whispered through tears. He tried to smile, couldn't. But the corners of his eyes crinkled. That was enough. Maggie cried into the sheets at his side, kissing his forehead again and again. His father stood in the doorway, unmoving, red-eyed. A man taught never to cry, finally letting go. Julian couldn't speak yet. Tubes made sure of that. But in his gaze, everything was said. Yes, I'm here. Yes, I kept my promise. Yes, I came back. News of his survival spread quickly. The town that had nearly been erased by water was rebuilding on the back of stories, and none louder than his. Reporters came. Donations poured in. Volunteers painted his name on murals. School kids wrote letters by the dozens. But Julian didn't care about any of that. He cared about the sunlight through his hospital window, the way his sister held his hand every morning, the feel of Maggie brushing his hair back, the sound of his father, voice trembling, saying, "I should have protected you. But instead, you protected us all." Julian shook his head slowly. It had never been about protection. It had always been about love. He was released from the hospital 2 weeks later, still weak, still scarred, but walking. When he stepped outside, a crowd had gathered. No cameras, no speeches, just people, quiet, watching. And then someone began to clap. Slow, strong, honest. Then another, and another. until the street filled with applause that sounded like rain, not the kind that drowns, but the kind that washes the world clean. Julian didn't speak. He didn't need to, because some names, once spoken by water, echo forever.